Hey everyone! My coach and friend of the channel, FIDE Master Nate Solon, recently released his new Chessable course on the Semi-Slav, which was perfect timing because I am looking to improve and expand my repertoire against 1d4, and I know a lot of you are often looking for that as well. So I hope you will be able to learn as much from this lesson as I did, and if you're interested in checking out Nate's course, I will put that link in the description. Here's the lesson. And before we get started though, Nate, why don't you tell us about the new course that you just released?
Yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for having me back on. It's always fun. But yeah, so I just came out with this course for black versus d4 and actually versus everything but e4. So c4 and knight f3 and everything else. It's on Chessable. It's 100 repertoire, which means it's 100 total lines, which is like a lot shorter than a lot of the other courses, which I'm a believer in because I think even 100, like we were just talking about, 100 lines is already actually kind of a lot for most players. So I find it's not about memorizing like a huge volume of lines. It's about having an approach and a strategy that you can wrap your head around and like be confident rather implementing. I've got one for white, I've got one for black versus e4, and then this is like, finishing the trifecta to be like a full repertoire because this is black for versus everything but e4. So it's like the three, I've got a full repertoire now. So I guess
Awesome.
I can move on and do something else with my life now that those are done. My course is on the Semi-Slav. You play some Semi-Slavs, like depending on the move order. So that's sort of a natural topic. One thing I looked at to start with was like your overall stats.
Nice.
Because I feel like this is always interesting to look at as a sanity check. So this is what I have up. I think a lot of it is just a numbers game of you can see here you faced E4 800 times and D4 300 times.
Mm.
I think a lot of it just comes down to practice that you just are going to face e4 so much more often. So for people who aren't familiar with it, the semi-Slav is basically going to be characterized by this pawn triangle, and you can do that against a lot of white move orders, and it's pretty good, and like it's going to end up transposing quite often. But anyway, so in terms of the stats, just for e4 versus d4, you're scoring like a little better versus e4, but not a huge amount. But then where it actually got really interesting is if we drill down one move, you're usually playing d5. This is what I found really interesting is against the London, you're actually crushing,
Oh, slay.
right? 55, which because you're a London player as white, right?
Yeah, yep.
That kind of makes sense that you would have a lot of understanding there and like know how to react to that.
Yeah, that's
Um,
interesting.
but against the Queen's Gambit declined, you're kind of getting killed. It's like the reverse.
Yeah. Oh, that's good to
So I would
know.
say overall, like you're feeling that you're struggling versus d4, appears to be somewhat correct, but it's actually more specifically, it's all about the Queen's Gambit. What's like sort of your, I guess maybe to start, like what's your thought process as far as your black repertoire versus d4 in terms of which openings you're playing and like the move orders you're using and stuff like that?
So recently I like for once just tried to actually like create a repertoire, which was just me like simplifying what I basically just already play without having, really studied it in the past. So I basically simplified to just playing, the Queen's Gambit declined against pretty much everything except the London. But I guess I still play similar moves against the London. But yeah, and what that, unfortunately, there's not a ton of material out there that I was able to find on
Mhm.
the Queen's Gambit declined. And so it was me kind of just like playing around with, what the best engine moves are, or what, the majority of online players are playing. And that led me into these kind of like the positional lines,
Uh-huh.
which are, they work, but they're a little boring. And I feel like the problems I've been having are that I'm not really sure what to do like after I get that initial setup
Mhm.
after like, 5-10 moves. So I will often try and go for the Kamryn springs, but usually at my
Mhm.
level, people aren't really like falling for the trap that I like to set. So
Yeah, that's actually so that's one huge difference between how you're playing the semi-Slav and what I do in my course, because you go for the Cambridge Springs,
yeah,
whereas I go for the Botvinnik, which are really, really different.
I
Um,
don't know what the Botvinnik is.
yeah, okay, well maybe we could look at like one of these that gets to a yeah, so in this game again you're playing the E6. So the way I do it in this course is I start out with so you play E6, which is like the Queen's Gambit declined. In my course, I play C6, which is the Slav move order. So you can get to a semi-Slav either way, because the semi-Slav is defined by both of these moves. So
Right.
like anything with movers, there's trade-offs. One downside of playing this is like in the first game we looked at, White can play this version of an exchange Queen's Gambit declined, which is sort of dangerous. Like they get to pin your knight, and in this exact move order, it can be hard to develop this bishop. So this is absolutely playable for black, but it's like one option that white has that can sort of cause some problems. Whereas if you go the with the Slav, um, they can do the exchange Slav, which does annoy some people because it's like arguably kind of boring, but also I would say like pretty harmless, like not that hard to deal with really. Like so this would be a key position you get from the semi-Slav, where white plays bishop g5 and introduces this pin. So what you're doing right now is playing knight b7 and then queen a5, which is the Cambridge Springs.
Yes.
But what I would do, or at least what I do in this particular course, is to play d takes c4.
Mm.
This introduces the Botvinnik, and then white's most logical move probably is e4 to try to take the center and get this pawn back, and then you defend it.
Mm.
So you're grabbing a pawn right off the bat. If white doesn't do anything, you're just going to gradually like develop, consolidate, eventually break with c5 and just be up a pawn with a great position. So this sends the game down a very sharp route because white should act with like a great sense of urgency here because like they're down a pawn, we're controlling all this space with this pawn chain on the queen side. So they can and should play e5, right?
Sure.
So now this knight is pinned and attacked and can't move. So the only option is to counterattack.
Oh,
Um,
okay. I feel like I've seen this somewhere.
yeah, I mean, well, this is just the start of the line, but this is like a very sharp opening. So they usually play back, bishop back, and again you have to counterattack. And then here white can go for this temporary piece sacrifice to maintain the pin.
Mm.
They get 2 pawns for the piece, and then they're going to get this piece back at the end of the day. Traditional main line here was knight d7, which is still good, but which has a lot of theory. In my course, I recommend kind of a newer move, bishop e7. So this is like, I'm definitely a big believer in the value of surprise in the opening, but there's different ways you can go about it. You can try to surprise your opponent by playing an offbeat opening right off the bat, or you can play more of a mainstream opening, but play it in a different way later. So that's more of my approach here. Like Semi-Slav is absolutely a mainline opening, but I'm playing a somewhat less common move here, bishop e7, but which is also playable. So after this whole like sort of semi-forced line, we get to this position, the dust is kind of settled, material's equal, but the pawn structure is wildly asymmetrical. Like white has all these kingside pawns, the h pawn is even passed, but we have this big pawn chain on the queen side. So it's like a really, really imbalanced position, which is still playable for both sides. When you pose your opponent unusual problems early in the opening, you provoke more mistakes, like both immediately in the opening, but also later, because they tend to get in time pressure. And I kind of believe that like a lot of blunders probably have something to do with like mental bandwidth getting exhausted. Like
Mm.
the more pressure you put your opponent under, the more they have to think about, the more likely they'll make some kind of blunder later. So that's why I like to, that's why this is my recommendation.
In this position, what's like your general plan? Like, how do you develop your other minor pieces? And do you castle at all? Do you castle queenside? How do you do
Yeah.
that?
Well, that's a great question, and like really what you should be thinking about, because I would say like from your games, my overall impression in the big picture was where you're getting into trouble is not necessarily like the opening, like the first few moves, but more so the middle game of like I didn't feel like you have a clear sense of like, okay, now that I get to this position, like how am I going to apply pressure to my opponent and win the game?
Yes, I found that too. Just looking through because I had just opened up and gone through some lines in opening tree and just it's you're right. It's not like I was losing completely out of the opening. It was like a little bit into the middle game, and you kind of see me just kind of like shuffling pieces around and like the pieces are kind of just like, what are we doing? We don't know.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
I often describe it in terms of like, are you choosing a play from the playbook or are you writing the playbook during the game?
mm,
Right? Because one of those is a lot harder than the other. Just like, it's like people are coming at you, the clock is ticking down. Very hard to write the playbook during the game. So you want to sort of have that playbook of typical plans that you can use. As far as this position, so I mean, it's very asymmetrical. So that sort of like lends itself to the sides having different plans. Usually we're going to be castling queenside because that's where we have our pawn shield. Like it's somewhat advanced, but at least there are very many of those pawns.
At least they're there, yeah.
Pawn for king. Whereas if you go over here, your king has no pawn shield.
Right.
Other factors are this pawn is isolated and potentially weak on d4. So if you castle queenside and you put a rook there, you start piling up on that, which can be good. White, meanwhile, this h pawn could become dangerous, especially in an endgame. They also often try to apply pressure on this diagonal. Typically, we're going to play bishop b7, and then at the right moment, free that bishop with c5. The knight can go either to d7 or a6. In this particular course, a lot of the lines I recommend, the knight goes to a6, and then we're going to castle queenside. Pressure d4 is one idea. And then
with
often... Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, with the knight on a6, do you just kind of keep it there and see like where it wants to go, or is the general plan to like reroute it to like c7, d5, or like b4, or just kind of it depends?
Yeah. So I mean, for the moment, knight f6 is kind of just getting it out of the way so you can castle. But obviously, the knight on the rim is dim. You don't want to leave it over there forever. So often, it's going to go to b4. And then d5 is a great square, or on a really good day, maybe d3 would be amazing. If that bishop moves. So there's a great trap here, which is kind of we'll show some of these ideas. So g3 is white's most popular move, getting ready to fianchetto out of the bishop. Bishop b7, bishop g2, and then here's like a key idea that makes this line work. So for the moment, this is pinned. So white may be threatening knight takes b5. But one key principle in the Botvinnik is, even though it starts out by grabbing a pawn, it's not really a materialistic opening. It's more about dynamic play. So a6 here is not a great move because you don't want your bishop to just get trapped back here while you're playing passively. So actually, the better move is knight a6, which looks like you blundered a pawn, but this is actually the start of a sacrifice. And it's actually so that was pawn number one. There's a triple pawn sacrifice in this line.
Ooh, okay.
So you castle queenside. So just continuing the development plan. So here's pawn number 2, right? Check. And then king b8, pawn number 3. So you've given up 3 pawns. But in return, we got to develop all of our pieces. So now you can play knight b4, hitting the bishop and threatening to come in here. So the most common move, and what's interesting about this particular trap, all of white's moves that I'm playing so far are the number one most common move at like the amateur level in the online database. So that doesn't mean you will like get this line, obviously, because it's like we're already at move 18, and you start multiplying 50%, whatever, it gets to be a small number. But it does mean it's like, to me, it shows that like it's easy for white to go wrong. Like this is exactly what we're talking about, right? Like we're putting our opponent in a situation where like they can't just play normal, obvious chess moves and get a great position.
Yeah, and they all seem like natural moves.
Bishop e4 was the most common move. Now we can grab this pawn. Okay. Well, so maybe we can do this one as a puzzle for your viewers. Black to play here. Actually, while you think about that, let me just grab a water. I'll be right back.
Great. Chat, help me out here. Chat, please. I was thinking queen e5, but I think that's too slow. Okay, Nate, we have an answer from the chat.
Okay.
I cheated from them.
Uh-huh.
Is it...
I got my Guy Fieri Flavor Town sparkling water.
Love it. Is it rook takes e4, followed by knight d3?
Exactly. Very good. So, yeah, once this knight lands on d3, white's king can move to 4 different squares, but it's going to be either losing the queen or checkmate, no matter what. So king f1, queen f2, right?
Mm-hmm.
King d1, knight f2 is a fork. King e2. In this case, we can play queen b2 and come around this way.
Ooh, that's nice.
So now if king comes up, this is mate. And if king goes this way, well, there's probably multiple ways to win. But for example, f5, picking up the queen. Again, you don't want to like count on traps too much in the opening because, of course, more often than not, you will not get this 23 move line on the board. But it kind of illustrates some typical ideas, and it shows that, like, white doesn't have to make a ridiculous mistake to get in trouble in this opening.
So what if the bishop, instead of going to e4, what if it just goes back to g2?
G2. Well, I think then we can just come in with knight D3 directly.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Oh, so bishop e4. Okay, sorry, I'm just understanding that the whole reason for the bishop e4 was to prevent that move.
Maybe, in terms of sort of like, do you want to go for like the Queen's Gambit declined or the Semi-Slav? I would say, so much of the opening is like what position do you like to play, right? So the Queen's
Right.
Gambit declined, where you just do this and this stuff first, is very good if you like to play it safe, and you're just like, okay, you know what? Let me get a foothold in the center. Let me castle, and then like I'll figure the rest of it out. And like I don't mind being a bit cramped. I don't mind playing a long maneuvering game and perhaps an end game. But if you're more like, I want to mix it up right away and get like sort of a non-standard position and play more ambitiously, then that's more of the Semi-Slav.
Especially because I've been playing in these local tournaments and I end up playing the same people over and over again. So it's like I know what they do if they're a Queen's Gambit player. I know that
Mhm.
the lines that we typically go down and we will have the same game, for the first 14, 15, 16 moves. So for me, looking into some of these more exciting lines, it's more just like trying to mix it up and get them out of their comfort zone because I know what they're going to play if I don't mix it up. And just having that extra tool in my arsenal.
Yeah, so you could. I mean, it would be interesting to try that against some of those opponents. But okay, yeah, I got way far afield from the first game we were looking at. So in this game, you do actually go for the Queen's Gambit declined. This is an opening that you can play a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
What you did though with Rook E8 94, I checked this line. This has been played like a lot at the Grandmaster level, so this is definitely a valid way to play it. But then this is maybe a good spot to talk about how important middle game plans are, right?
Yes.
But here, so far, the way you've played it is 100% correct. Like many strong grandmasters have gone this way. But then the question is, how do you play this position?
Yeah, I think that's kind of my problem is I don't really know. Because often it seems like they will get this queenside attack with the, minority, the pawns coming forward, and I feel like I should be playing on the king side, but I don't really know like how to do that or like where exactly my pieces should go.
Yeah, I was looking at this a little bit. So you're definitely right that it makes the most sense for you to play on the king side. You've got this E4 pawn, which is kind of a wedge that's like controlling some space on the king side, and it's a little bit hard for white's pieces and especially the queen to shift over to the king side.
Yeah.
So that gives you some room to operate over there. So actually, I think this is a great example of like knowing a typical idea because in this position, I really like to move H5, sending this H pawn down to start to soften up white's king side. So if they play B4, I'd play H4, and then they have to decide if they want to let me play H3, which would really soften up the light scores. But if they play H3, then I've also kind of provoked a weakness.
Yeah, then I mean, in an ideal world, you're looking at like lining up your queen and bishop on that light diagonal and maybe sacking to get your queen in there and then getting your knight onto f3 and checkmating.
Yeah, and there can be some. I've seen some lines too where like if you can somehow get a rook over here,
Yes, that's the other
that can be
thing.
powerful too. So that would just be like an example of sort of one idea to like have in the playbook, like this idea of pushing this H pawn.
Yeah, that's good to remember because I feel like I hesitate to do that sometimes because I'm worried that it makes my king less safe. But I guess in these kinds of positions, like, what are they going to do about it,
It can make your king less safe anytime you push pawns in front of it, but you also have more control on that side of the board. And like if you're going to push a pawn in front of your king, the H pawn, the rook pawn, is the least dangerous. It's sort of like the
Yeah.
least important part of the pawn shield. The other tech, I think you might even have made a video about this technique of like playing against the engine. Yeah, maybe this would be a fun exercise. Okay, so like you or the chat can play white, and then I can have the engine play black.
Like my plan here for white, I want to move my knight to like f4 or play b4.
Okay, so either knight f4 or b4. Okay, which one do you want to go with?
Okay, I'll actually decide. I'll play b4.
Okay, so you're trying to do the minority attack. Okay, let's so then black is going to play h4.
Okay, now how about knight f4?
Okay, the computer is going to use that tempo to just come at you on the king side.
Oh, wow. Okay. Let's go knight back to e2.
H3.
g3. Oh, my light squares are terrible.
Yeah, the computer's going to play bishop g4. Actually, the engine evaluation here is already swinging quite far in black's favor, minus 1.5.
Oh, wow.
And
So
basically, it thinks it's going to play bishop g4 and knight g4 and checkmate you over here.
so what if instead, if we want to go back to like when I before I played knight f4, what if I played b5 instead?
Sure, b5. And by the way, this is maybe just to like go back, just like for like the viewers or whatever who haven't seen the drill. So the point of this drill, I learned this from GM Eugene Perelstein, who's my co-author on my evaluation book. Eugene's really good at opening preparation. So he's a grandmaster, but he's even like worked for like 2,700 plus grandmasters for opening prep. So he's super good at opening prep. But he taught me this drill of to understand the plans, play against the engine on the opposite side, right? So here we want to understand Black's plan. So we're playing against the engine as White, and the idea is I want to understand how, as Black, I can crush typical moves that like players at my level would play.
Yeah, this is often how I will develop my repertoire if I don't have Nate telling me what to do, or if I don't have a course or a video.
And what you're doing of like giving yourself a take back and trying something different is very much allowed and encouraged in this drill, because you want to see like how you would react to different tries for the opponent. So the engine's going to play h3 anyway.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would probably go into that like g3 thing then. So okay, then going back another move, what if I play h3 myself?
Yeah. And then another thing that like you want to get from this is little rules of thumb. So like one thing that I can see, since I can see the engine lines, is that White should absolutely play h3 here. Like if they allow h3 and get the light squares opened up, it's extremely, extremely dangerous. But that's something that you can note as Black. Like if they let my pawn get all the way to h3, that's great for me.
Yeah.
So they can play h3. Okay, and now it's going to play bishop f5.
Okay, kind of my other idea is like knight a4 and knight c5. I just don't like that knight placement on e2.
So it appears that the computer is lining up for a sacrifice on h3.
Yeah. Yeah, so then the question is, can you play knight c4 anyway? Or knight c5, I mean.
Yeah, I would see. Probably this makes the most sense, right?
Yeah.
Displace the queen.
So then do I have to go like king h2?
Maybe. You can also see, like, I love doing this too, because you can see how powerful a planet is. Like, from White's perspective, it's like a tough spot to be in, right? Like,
Yeah, it's scary from this side.
like, I don't know. That's like a tough decision. I mean, you can like keep going with this drill as long as you want, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like we've already gotten a lot of like, starting from this position where we were feeling like we didn't know what to do.
Yeah,
We
that gave me
definitely
some
got,
ideas.
some very like valuable ideas that you could apply. One is pushing this H pawn to soften up White's king side, and like knowing that. I also find it gives me a lot of confidence, like knowing these things about the position. Because if I have this on the board, if I have this background knowledge of like, okay, I have this idea of pushing the H pawn. If White lets it to get to H3, that's actually a big mistake, and I get a huge attack. It's like, and then imagine my pawn sitting on H4, and I know that. It's like I already know so much about the position that my opponent has to try to figure out.
Yeah, Nate, thank you so much. I feel like I'm going to take away a lot from this and hopefully start destroying people a lot faster.
Maybe give the Botvinnik a shot.
Yeah.
If that type of like aggressive, chaotic energy appeals to you.
Absolutely.